On today's video, are immigrants really getting free stuff when they come to the United States illegally? So one of the most common things that I see on my YouTube channel every single day is, are people getting free stuff? Americans are homeless on the streets while these immigrants are coming here and getting all types of benefits. Shouldn't it be the Americans that get these benefits? Why are we giving benefits to people that are not from here while Americans have necessity? I see this on my YouTube channel every single day, and I've been waiting to reply because I don't want to spill out misinformation. But now I'm in contact with a few people that recently arrived to the United States, and I can give you guys adequate information because what's on the internet right now is literally nothing but misinformation. When you arrive to the United States right now, the vast majority of people, and I mean the overwhelming majority of people, are voluntarily turning themselves into U.S. Border Patrol. So nobody's crossing the border illegally, at least not in 2024. Most people who are entering the United States are not entering illegally. They're turning themselves into customs. Now, when the migrant caravans were coming in, if you guys remember, I went to El Paso, Texas, and I spoke with a representative, a spokesperson for U.S. Border and Customs.
They'll have a temporary parole status, and of course, if they don't show up at their immigration hearing, a lot of people don't realize is if you don't show up, then you get a deportation order in absentia. And if a law enforcement officer encounters you anywhere out in the country, or ICE can then deport you immediately.
Awesome. What a mess.
So that's the shortest, most compact spiel I've ever gained on immigration law, and I'm actually the press spokesman here for El Paso.
Awesome. You really are.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Now, on the media, they were portraying it as thousands of people that were going to rush the border. So what we see on the news versus what's actually happened on the ground are two different things. Now, the person that we spoke to was somebody on the ground whose job it was to talk to the media and give them the proper information. And the information that he gave us is that there are people from like 4 countries who were lined up and entering in single file line. It was an orderly thing. They were turning themselves in to be vetted, to be, scanned and filtered by the US government. And the notion that people were going to rush the border was a complete sack of garbage. So what happens when somebody turns themselves in? Well, when they turn themselves in, they're going to be vetted by the US government. There are certain people who cannot be deported, cannot be arrested, namely minors. If somebody who is a minor walks up to the gate, or a mother with a minor that's unattended or something along those lines, it now becomes international law. You cannot arrest a minor. So if a minor turns themselves in, they cannot be arrested. This is the migrants that are staying in hotels. You may have heard migrants are staying in hotels. The migrants that are staying in hotels are minors. They're underaged. You cannot arrest them because they're minors. This has nothing to do with the current administrations. It has nothing to do with the United States. International law, you cannot arrest minors. In the case of my family from Cuba, there was no free flight. There was no free hotel. We had to pay the hotel. We had to pay the plane ticket to get our family over here. Otherwise, the U.S. government would have possibly deported them very briefly. They call you and they say, hey, get your family out of here. And they have to report to a county. The county that they report to, they're on probation with a foot monitor, one of those electronic monitoring devices for people on probation. When they arrive to their family members, they do not have a work permit. Thus, if they want to start working, they have to start working cash jobs. It can take 2, 3 to 6 months to receive a work permit. Without a work permit, you cannot work legally in the United States. If they have children, they receive food stamps. Yes, they do receive food stamps if they have children. Each case is different, and not every nationality and not every family structure gets the same benefits. In the case of a father, a mother, and a child, they will receive food stamps. But they also are now here in the United States awaiting a parole hearing to have their U.S. permanent residency. Not everybody gets their permanent residency. There have been individuals who come and for some reason or another, the court decides deportation when they get that court hearing. Some people are allowed to become U.S. citizens. They first have to become a U.S. resident. In general, a permanent resident has to be permanent resident for at least 5 years before he can apply to become a U.S. citizen. So now we understand the process. You turn yourself into the government at the border. They decide if they're going to deport you or not. If they release you on a probation with a court date. If you have any infractions or any type of legal consequences before your court date, you are assured that you will be deported. Those who are lucky will eventually be able to become a permanent resident in the United States. Permanent resident means that you are now in this country permanently. You're not going back. However, if you are a permanent resident, you can be deported. Just because you break the law doesn't mean you're going to get deported. Many people who become permanent residents eventually get deported. Driving with a suspended driver's license, possession, or carrying firearms in an illegal fashion, these individuals will not become U.S. citizens. They will be deported. Individuals who pass 5 years as permanent residents and they do not have criminal records can apply for U.S. citizenship. The U.S. citizenship is not guaranteed. You must know how to speak English. You must know U.S. history in detail, from the states to the presidents to the holidays, anything that is U.S. history. When I became a U.S. citizen, I had to go to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It's not a free process. Becoming a U.S. citizen can cost thousands of dollars. You need to have the proper education and classes and courses to learn. You have to pay for your appointments, and most importantly, you better make sure you pass that test, because if you start to fail over and over again, your residency can expire. With you not being a U.S. citizen, you become illegal. You can lose your legal status simply by not renewing your permanent residency. At this point, most people who have half a brain will actually go ahead and try to become a U.S. citizen. There are individuals that I have met that for some freaking reason don't become U.S. citizens, continue to renew their residency. I have even met individuals who, again, for some hard to understand reason, do not renew their permanent residency and become illegal because they did not pay the fee. When I became a U.S. citizen, the fee used to be about $750. I have no idea what it costs today, but it's a considerable chunk of money. Very well worth it. I mean, if you don't pay that, you become illegal. So 6 or 7 years into this process, these individuals will have the opportunity to be a U.S. citizen. When they become a U.S. citizen, they have all the rights you do. They can vote, they can live anywhere in the United States. They're now Americans in every sense of the word. They're no less American than you born here. In fact, in some ways, they'll have more rights than you because they have rights in the United States and they have rights in their country of birth. They can actually have internationally more rights than you. They also decided to become an American citizen. You were born here. You didn't really pick this. Those individuals who decided to become U.S. citizens had to pass a U.S. citizenship test. 100 questions roughly based on U.S. history. Very difficult questions. They have to study for this. However, there are hundreds of other questions that they did not know were going to be asked. Most of those questions relate to what they were doing in their home country. If you are part of a criminal organization, if you've broken the law in the United States, it's a series of about 200 or more questions, and the answer probably needs to be no to every single one of those questions. If you start checking yeses, probably you are not going to be welcomed into the United States. What is interesting when I did this test to become a US citizen is that I realized that the vast majority, 85% of people who are US citizens by birth, would not pass a US citizenship test. The questions are difficult. You have to know everything about American history. But there are questions like, do you consume certain substances? Let's take the case of the homeless population. Most people who are homeless in the United States feel that it is an injustice that families that come with children to the United States are getting food stamps because you're a US born citizen and they came here, they're not from here, so why are they getting benefits when I'm not getting them? Here's the ordeal. If you, as a homeless person, started to take the US citizenship test, you wouldn't qualify to be a US citizen. You're living on somebody else's land illegally, you're taking illegal substances, you've been arrested for trespassing, you've been arrested for loitering. You cannot be a US citizen. Individuals who are born US citizens feel because they're born here, they're simply entitled to every benefit that this country has. That is not true. If you are homeless and you are engaging in an onslaught of criminal activity like purchasing and consuming illegal substances, no, you are a criminal. The US government isn't going to reward you for being a criminal. U.S. government wants to punish you and put you in prison. So you have to understand the misunderstanding that a lot of people have was, well, I'm a U.S. citizen, I should be entitled to all this. No. If you're a U.S. citizen and you're breaking the law, consuming illegal substances, and you're being a detriment to society, engaging in criminal activity with an extensive criminal record, you don't get nothing from the government. You get a prison cell. Look at it this way. You have two children. One of them is adopted and one of them is your own child. If your own child, for some reason or another, decides that he wants to misbehave in school, curse out his teachers, get suspended, and well, it's just a problem child, you're not going to reward him with a trip to Disney World. You're going to punish him. However, if the other child, who is not your child, it is an adopted child, but they are well behaved, you may reward them. In fact, many parents who have adoptive children use those adoptive children as an example for their children when they misbehave, because the people you care about the most are the ones you discipline the most. Everybody knows that. The fact remains, just because you are born as a U.S. citizen, if you decide to lead a life of criminal behavior, you're not getting rewarded by the government, you're getting punished by the government. And frankly, whether it hurts your feelings or not, so what if you're an American citizen? If you're a drug addict criminal, the government's not going to reward you for that. Here comes somebody with a family who will, for a fact, after passing all these tests, it isn't one, it's initial processing, it's the probation period, it's being a U.S. permanent resident, it's passing the U.S. citizenship test. This individual's been through 4 or 5 filters. I'm sorry to tell you, but naturalized citizens are overall much better quality than U.S. born citizens because they've been filtered out. You've been refining it. You get a better product. You don't get a better product if you've never been filtered. If you just were randomly born here and now you're a drug addict piece of crap, you think the government needs to give you food stamps and give you free housing and give you free stuff, but forgetting the fact that you contributed nothing to this country. Well, what about homeless veterans? Okay, let's take homeless veterans. If they were discharged honorably, they would have a crap load of benefits. If you did what you agreed to do and signed up for, you wouldn't be a homeless veteran. A lot of the people that are homeless veterans were discharged dishonorably. They quit. They weren't really doing what they were supposed to. A lot of them get hurt on purpose, thinking that they're going to get a disability for life. In other words, they're people that are trying to exploit the system, did not complete their assignment that they agreed to complete. But it's a U.S. veteran. So what? They didn't complete their assignment. You're a U.S. veteran. So what? They're a drug addict, but U.S. veteran. A lot of these U.S. veterans are also registered offenders. Yeah, they're predators. But they're U.S. veterans. Okay, but they're also a predator. So which one are they? They're both. Okay. What do we do now? We're going to give benefits to registered offenders because they're veterans? I don't know. Hey, that's not my call to make. Just because somebody was a veteran or is a veteran, that doesn't mean that they can't be a predator, an addict, a criminal, and somebody who doesn't want to contribute anything to society. A lot of people think that by putting on the military hat, they're going to get a bunch of respect and credibility. We've even seen people doing, what is it called? Stolen valor. These are individuals who pretend to be veterans when they're really not. Stolen valor is not out of the question. We've seen people who were deeply involved in organizations and stuff like that, getting all types of benefits, and it turned out they were fakes and they pulled it off for years. So that in itself doesn't mean anything. Now, if you're offended by what I just said, clean out your ears and listen carefully. Here in Bradenton, Florida, they were going to build a homeless shelter for veterans, and the rich people in West Bradenton fought back. You got people here in this county in local offices who advocated for making sure that they didn't put in a homeless shelter for veterans because it would deface their community and bring crime. If you don't believe me, you can look this up. All I'm doing is talking right now, but you got people who are actively out there going after homeless shelters that are being built to house homeless veterans specifically. So you can't be mad at me for talking. So people get mad at me for talking, but then they're not mad at these individuals who are actually advocating to stop a project to house homeless veterans. I would never do that. I would never get in the way of housing the homeless. I don't care if they're veterans. I don't care if they're criminals. Don't care if they're addicts. I believe that nobody should be on the streets. But here's the reality. People are going to get mad at me on today's video for telling you the truth about homeless veterans, but they're not mad at the people who are advocating to stop building homeless shelters for veterans. I would never do that. I could not see myself passing out flyers to prevent a shelter for the homeless, whether they were veterans or not. And that's the problem with people in this country right now. Well, if they're veterans, we have to do it. I don't care if they're veterans. If they're homeless, they should be housed. There should be shelters for the homeless. If they're veterans, then they all get riled up and they're all in arms. Oh, there's veterans that are homeless. Oh, what about elderly people? Not everybody's military. People put so much importance on military, and we forget that civilians matter too. People's parents, elderly, infirmed, people with mental disabilities. How would you feel if right now your wife or your husband gets a brain tumor and becomes mentally ill? Then you die and they are no longer able to take care of themselves. They end up homeless on the streets. They end up getting thrown stuff at them. They end up being called a bum. They end up on the streets with nobody to take care of them, perhaps in a wheelchair, being thrown around, being robbed, being abused, being profiled by the police. Wouldn't that just be the most painful thing to watch? This is happening to people right now in the United States, and they're not getting help from the government. And it is true that while those exist and situations do exist, and there's people in that situation that are getting nothing from the government, that doesn't mean that you can't give stuff for people that are coming here. This country has enough land and resources for everybody, the homeless and the immigrant. And by the way, we're not talking about immigrants today. Immigrant means you migrate. You're moving around. We're talking about permanent residents here. These are people who are eventually going to try to qualify to be U.S. citizens. So they're not immigrants, they're permanent residents. Of course, a lot of people today don't know the difference between those, but anybody who knows the difference, well, I just taught you the difference. Hopefully from now on you remember that. I think the problem is that people confuse immigration policy with welfare policy. They're two totally different things. They want to grab two things that are on two completely different spectrums and put them side by side. And of course, if you were to compare the case of somebody who was in that situation that I mentioned to somebody who came here from another country and they're getting food stamps, you would most likely say it's an injustice. It appears like an injustice. But while it appears like an injustice, it really isn't. Especially when you consider that the person who's a permanent resident or on probation waiting for a hearing is eventually going to be a citizen themselves. And when they get to be elderly, they could find themselves in the same exact predicament. Have you ever thought about that? Again, I'm a person who was born somewhere else, came here, became a U.S. citizen. I could, in elderly age, find myself on the side of the road, homeless, and with nobody to take care of me. But remember that the immigrants that were vetted, the vast majority of the ones that got approved were the ones that had children who can help take care of their parents. It may seem like an injustice, and this world really isn't fair, but the notion that, immigrants are getting all these free benefits while U.S. citizens are homeless on the streets, that's a very, preliminary evaluation. At face value, an illegal is getting food stamps and a U.S. homeless veteran is on the streets. That's at face value. But let's dive into the details because it's more elaborate than that. People just look at the face value, where here's an illegal getting benefits and here's a homeless veteran on the streets. Which one looks like the right thing to do? At face value, but dive into each person's case individually. Okay, so this person here receives $1,800 a month. They don't want an apartment. They want to live in a tent in the woods because they consume $1,400 a month in something illegal. That's now a choice to be homeless. They may not tell you that. They may not want to admit, hey, I'm getting $1,800 a month, but $1,400 of that is my consumption. So I want to be homeless in the woods getting high because I don't want to integrate to society. You guys wouldn't believe, because you don't know this. See, I know this because I actually meet these homeless people and I talk to them. You wouldn't believe how many homeless people get food stamps and get a disability, get an SSI, get some type of pension. It just isn't enough for housing. Many times it is enough for housing, but they refuse to get a roommate. For example, I've been to homeless camps where I find 3 people that are elderly, and all 3 of them make $700 a month. That's $2,100 a month. They could rent a house for $1,200 a month, work together. The problem is they can't get along with other people. So here come people from Guatemala and from Nicaragua, and they live 10 to a house. I recently had an Uber passenger from Venezuela. She told me she is the 10th person in her house. She pays $500 for rent. That's it. She's probably, somebody's making a profit on that, by the way. But the point being that it's profitable even. Let's just wrap your head around that. Why don't 10 homeless Americans who all get $700 a month get together, rent a house, live there peacefully? Because they can't. They can't get along with each other. They'll destroy the property. They'll have the cops there every other day. They'll have fights, arguments. They can't get along with each other. So now it's not about whether they're here legally or not. It's rather, can you live with other people? Can you get along with other people? Can you respect other people's space? Can you respect other people's properties? Can you get along with other people? And the vast majority of people that are in that situation are so, I hate to say it, but they just can't get along with other people. Dude, there's houses here in Bradenton, Florida, where I live, that there's 10, 12 people living in one single house. Venezuelans or Mexicans or Guatemalans, they all live in one single house. 10, 12 people. Everybody gets along. Have you ever seen the cops have to show up to settle a dispute between Guatemalans? They get along. They figure it out. And that's the problem with too many people in this country. They can't figure it out. 10 times 7 is 7,000. You only need $2,400 to rent a giant house. Why can't they do it? They can't get along. So, hey, now it's not a problem of the math doesn't add up. The problem is your personality doesn't add up. You haven't learned how to live with other people, or in the case of many people, they tell me they'd rather be homeless than live with other people. So now it's a choice. You go to some of these homeless camps and you got 10 people all living on a piece of land. If those 10 people got together and rented a house together, they would have a surplus of $5,000 or $6,000 every month. And that's assuming they only put in $500 or $600 a month. And they don't do it because they can't get along with other people. So the problem now becomes coexistence. If you can't coexist with other people, it's on you. And I left this part for the end of the video because I really don't want to hurt people's feelings. I left it for the end of the video. It needs to be said on today's video, but I left it towards the end because I don't want to hurt people's feelings. But if you've watched the whole video, we're having a conversation here. So let's get to it. This part hurts the most. And the fact is that people that come to the United States are productive. They want to buy houses. They want to buy cars. They want to get in debt. They want to raise their children properly. They risk their lives to get here. They risk their life to get here versus they risk their life to get high. And I know that hurts a lot of people's feelings, but it's the truth. If you have somebody who risked their life to get here and somebody who risked their life to get high, you're probably going to bet your money on the one that's a hustler, a go-getter, not the one that's going to overdose. And unfortunately, this is a capitalistic country. And in this country, your value is what you can give society. And if you're unproductive in society, you're worthless. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you fact for fact, that's what it is. An individual who comes to this country is going through that elaborate process for 7, 8, 9 years. These individuals cannot catch a single offense to become a U.S. citizen. They're probably, after they become a U.S. citizen, going to be an even more upstanding citizen. I remember when I became a U.S. citizen, it was like, wow, I'm here now. When I passed all those tests and I became a U.S. citizen, after I became a U.S. citizen, now I had to work even harder. Now I'm here. I ain't going nowhere. I ain't getting deported. This is my country. Let's make something out of this. After you become a U.S. citizen, you become even more productive because now you know you have that stability. You're not going to get deported. You're not going to get sent back. You're here. This is your country. Now you work even harder. The U.S. federal government isn't stupid as some people assume. The U.S. federal government is the most gangster organization on the face of this planet. Forget about the Russian mobsters and the cartels in Mexico. There is nothing more gangster than the U.S. federal government. The U.S. federal government knows that if you can get the hardest working people on the entire planet, bring them to your country, they're going to produce good results. Now, on the other hand, you got all these drug addicts that want to get high and they want to try. Let those people die. I'm not speaking for me. I'm speaking the way the U.S. federal government looks at it. That's why when you call the cops on dealers, they don't show up. And when you report a drug house, they don't shut it down. The federal government's a gangster. All these people, they want to get high and they want to let them overdose. $100,000, 100,000 people a year? Good. We don't need them. And again, I'm not speaking for me, okay? I'm the one telling you this, but don't take this as me saying this. I'm speaking for the U.S. government right now. If 100,000 Americans a year want to overdose and die, we don't need those people. For what? So they can get high and break into people's houses? We don't need them. A lot of people think that, the cartels, the Mexicans, and the Chinese are pushing this stuff over here to hurt Americans. They're not hurting America. Hey, they're helping America flush the toilet of undesirables. And again, you're hearing this come out of my mouth, but don't take it as me saying this. I'm letting you know how the U.S. government looks at it. Of course you're going to give benefits to people that are going to be enslaved to you. They're looking at the prospect of maybe one day we could be a U.S. citizen. That means you're not going to break our laws for at least 7 or 8 years. You're going to have to pay taxes. You're going to have to work. By the way, I don't know if you guys know this. New arrivals don't end up in places with low taxes. New arrivals end up in New York and California where it's 30% of your income. By the way, a house in West Virginia is worth $40,000, but a house in New York is worth $1 million. That means not only are you getting paid and taxed, you're getting paid less, you're getting taxed more, and things, a house costs 10 times as much. The prospect of being an immigrant in this country means you're getting paid half as much, but you're being charged 3 times more. Do you think it's by mistake that immigrant communities live in cities that have the highest tax brackets and highest real estate values? No, that's not by mistake. That's by design. Do you really think that the federal government is stupid? Do you really think that the most gangster organization on the face of the earth is going to get played by people who don't even speak English? You've lost your mind. The federal government knows what they're doing. You're grabbing people that are the most productive people on the face of the earth, and you're making them work for a dream that they have to work for in sweat and blood and tears every single day. A lot of immigrants, Cubans in particular, I'm Cuban, tell me that they're going back. This isn't for them. I hear this all the time from Cubans. You wouldn't believe how many people come to the United States and then they go back to their countries because they don't want to work this hard. I know today's video is going to hurt a lot of people's feelings. And look, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm trying to illustrate to you so that you can understand why these things are happening. Why are Americans homeless on the street versus why are immigrants getting benefits? It makes sense. Of course they're giving these people free stuff. They're trying to become U.S. citizens. Yeah, that's a lengthy process. They can't vote because, again, they're not U.S. citizens. Here's somebody who is going to be in your country working like an animal, getting taxed at a higher tax bracket. And by the way, I think it'd be a great idea if those people paid more taxes than everybody else. I don't know why the federal government hasn't done this. I mean, they're already doing it because the places where they end up pay higher taxes. But it would make sense also that, anybody from the permanent resident step downward should pay higher tax brackets. It makes sense to me. The easiest places to live in America are Alabama and West Virginia. Property taxes aren't $1,000. Individuals' houses are paid off. They don't have mortgages, and they get food stamps at a higher rate than anybody else. So the notion that if a Latino or a migrant wanted to move to West Virginia or Alabama, they would get ran out by the Klan. They have to be living in cities. Like, why do I live in Sarasota? Do you think I want to live in Sarasota? I don't want to live in Sarasota. You guys remember I moved to Alabama and bought property out in the country. But guess what? I can't be there because I'm an immigrant. Okay, I got forced out of there. So now I'm in Sarasota because I have to, because I'm an immigrant. But guess what? In Sarasota, I got to make $100,000 a year to live here. But guess what? The tax bracket for $100,000 is 3 times higher than the tax bracket when I lived in Alabama and only needed to make $20,000. Do you understand the mathematics between being an immigrant? When I lived in Alabama, I needed to make maybe $20,000 a year. I got ran out of Alabama for being a Latino. They didn't let me live there, so I had to come to Sarasota. Now in Sarasota, I got to make $100,000 a year. Now think about that for a minute. $20,000 pays $1,300 in taxes. $100,000, if I'm not getting good write-offs, I'm paying $10,000. I'm paying more money in taxes than the person in Alabama is making in a year. And that's what a lot of people don't really understand about this whole situation. Here's a person living in Ohio. They make $20,000 a year. Here's a person that just arrived from Guatemala, but they live in San Francisco. They're making $120,000 a year because everything is so expensive. Well, that Guatemalan is going to pay more in taxes every single year than the person down there in Ohio is going to make for himself. Okay, so there's a mathematical equation behind this that people don't get. And here's another thing. The only thing keeping certain politicians in power is the fact that there's this antagonistic character of an illegal immigrant coming to America. If that antagonistic character didn't exist, neither would those political parties, because that's the only thing they're holding on to is the hate for the person that they antagonize to make sure that they get the votes that they need to stay in power. If that antagonistic character didn't exist, neither would their political party. Many people think that Democrats are for immigrants and Republicans aren't. Who got rid of the wet foot, dry foot law that was letting Cubans become citizens instantly? Barack Obama, his last day in office. So this idea that one party is for immigrants and another one's against it, that doesn't exist. Both parties manipulate the situation to get their personal benefit. There's no political party that's for or pro or against immigration. That doesn't exist. The Republicans are against immigrants. That doesn't exist. Democrats are pro. That does not exist. Obama got rid of the wet foot, dry foot law because Cubans were voting Republican. And Democrats and Republicans, they all engage in the same tactics. There is no political party that's for or against immigration. There's political parties that are for votes and getting more votes, and that's the only thing that really matters. I hope you've learned something on today's video about why the U.S. government allows people to come to this country and gives them a little bit of help, because it will pay off greatly. Now, to throw money at homeless people is frankly like throwing money in the toilet. Most likely they're going to use it for drugs. If you give them food stamps, they sell the food stamps to get cash so that they can get high. You can't even give them food stamps. People buy and sell food stamps. Yes, people get food stamps and then they sell them because they don't want food. They want to get high. It's like throwing money down the toilet to give money to people that are unproductive. So if you're an unproductive, low-income U.S. citizen, of course we're not going to get. Why would you give money to poor people? They're just going to eat it and smoke it. Again, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings, but it just makes that much more sense to give benefit and help to somebody who's going to produce versus flushing it down the toilet of America's drug addiction. It just makes sense. I know I've said a lot of things today that can be hurtful, but the point of today's video is just to give you a better understanding and perspective on this situation and to tell you the truth. Yes, they're getting help. It makes sense to help them. Please use your brain. The same people who are antagonizing immigrants are the same people who refuse to give you benefits. They're telling you, hey, hate that person because they're getting free stuff, but those are the same people who are refusing to give you anything. They're not your friend. They're using you to get your vote so they can be in power. They don't care about those immigrants. One of the realest things I ever heard while living in Alabama is, if we don't love our own people, how can we love you? It's not that the U.S. federal government loves immigrants. They don't. They really don't. They don't even love their own people. How can they love immigrants? It's not that they love immigrants. It's that it makes sense. It makes sense to give somebody an opportunity and make sure that they're more successful than it does to flush it down the toilet. And by the way, when you give Americans money, they consume illegal substances. The proceeds go back to Colombia and Mexico. If you give immigrants the dream that they can be a U.S. citizen, they build a future here in the United States. Did you hear what I just said? If you give Americans money, they buy drugs and the money goes back to another country. If you give money to people that are here in the dream and hope that one day they can be a U.S. citizen, they save it to build dream here. One of the biggest hits that this country has ever taken was when 10 million Mexicans went back to their country. They took trillions of dollars away from the United States, and now Mexico has become just a global player that it's competing with the United States. It's a global powerhouse now because trillions of dollars that were here in the United States, you should have pitched what those people to stay here and become citizens. Again, if you understand economics, you understand that it makes sense. Anybody who comes to the United States from another country will also tell you that without the immigrant labor force, particularly the Latino, Central American labor force, these are the people that built America. Without those people, we'd be living in the Middle Ages. It ain't about being a citizen. It ain't about the fact that this country was built by immigrants. It ain't none of that. It's pure math. It makes sense. You got people that make up 25% of GDP in this country, yet they receive 5% of the income. It makes sense. Even if you give American people the money, they're going to consume products that come from Latin America. The money will go back to Latin America, and you want that money to stay here. How do you make that money stay here? Well, you let the people that are from Latin America come here to work, and then they build a dream that every American in this country can take advantage of, but because we're entitled, we don't take advantage of it. Simple facts. We don't take advantage of it because, well, we're entitled to it. Ohio, West Virginia, Alabama, these states have negative population growth. These people are not breeding. They're overdosing. They're dying from heart attacks. They're dying at a faster rate than they're breeding. If America doesn't bring some migrant people to Ohio and Alabama and West Virginia to at least make sure the houses don't fall apart, Springfield, Ohio has lost 20,000 people since the 1960s. If they don't bring a bunch of people in to take care of those houses, they're going to end up being a Detroit. They're like inches from being Springfield, Ohio is on path to being a Detroit. This town isn't going to exist in the future. Do you understand that these are towns that are not going to exist in the future because they're going to decay because the people there are not breeding and they're dying from overdoses? The overdose death rate in some of these southern Ohio counties is higher than the homicide rate in Tijuana, Mexico. These people are dying off at a faster rate than they're breeding. You have to bring somebody in to try something different.